panelists from left to right, Melody Stein, she, her, the founder and CEO of MXT 2510 in Yantern, who is an Asian woman smiling wearing a black blouse. Adriana Mallozzi, she, her, the founder and CEO of Puffin Innovations, a woman with dark hair wearing a blue blouse and a white lanyard in her wheelchair. Alex Pappas, he, him, a content creator and the creator of the Bearded Advocate. He is a man with the brown eyes, bushy eyebrows, and short facial hair wearing a gray baseball hat. And we also have Alvaro Silverstein, he, him, the co-founder and CEO of Wheel the World, a man with brown hair wearing sunglasses and an orange shirt. Below the panelists are the words, join our online communities, the Diversability Leadership Collective, get your first month free at https://bit.ly/diversability. Oh, I'm on the wrong one. I'm so sorry. I'm just gonna take this off because I read the wrong list, and we're just gonna get started. So on your screen is our powerhouse panel. We are joined today by disabled entrepreneurs who are really making a difference in the world by just existing and trying to make their own careers in a world where really the workplace is very inaccessible. So I am Marie Dagenet Lewis. I'm a content manager here at Diversability. I am a pale-skinned woman with long black hair wearing a gray shirt and glasses, and I'm sitting in a corner of a room, and I'm joined with our powerhouse panels and our sponsors, Interpreter Now. Thank you so much for sponsoring this event. And first, I just want to introduce everyone and have them speak for themselves, tell us a little bit about what their business is and how they really strive to create disabled excellence by being entrepreneurs. So Melody, I would love to start with you. If you don't mind, please starting with an image description. We would really appreciate that.
Sure. Hello there. I'm an Asian woman. I have short black hair with glasses, and I have a white background and a gray sweatshirt. And the sweatshirt is from my own company, MX1025. I started my first business was a restaurant, and then I started consulting in the deaf community with making sure they had different business resources. And now I have a sustainable based clothing that I started with my daughter a couple of months ago.
Thank you so much, Melody. And I remember seeing your announcement with the pictures of you and Tiffany wearing the sweatshirt, and they look so comfortable. Really, next, we want to get to our next speaker, Alex Pappas, who is also a member of the Diversability Leadership Collective. Really excited to see you today, Alex. Tell us a little bit about the Bearded Advocate and what you do.
Thank you guys for having me on again. So my name is Alex. I run the Bearded Advocate. It's a podcast that I run for general advocacy between the disabled community, the chronic community, and kind of lump mental health in that a lot as well. I myself am a white male. I have a bald head. I have a much larger beard now than the actual poster picture. Been growing it out for the majority of COVID. Glasses, and I'm wearing very large over-the-ear headphones with a gray polo shirt, blurred out background. But yeah, no, I'm growing a podcast and kind of seeing what I can do with it this year. It's about 9 months old now. And going into 2022, I have a lot of different plans for it and a lot of things I want to start exploring and kind of expanding into.
I'm really excited to see what 2022 has in store for that. Our next speaker is Adriana Mallozzi. Hi, Adriana.
Hi, I'm Adriana Mallozzi. I'm a Caucasian woman in a power wheelchair with short dark hair, purple headdress, and in the background is a filing cabinet. I am the founder and CEO of Puffin Innovations, and we are creating hands-free access for people with limited mobility in their upper extremities to all of their consumer electronics.
And also, I have to give you a shout out for founding the 15% Club on Clubhouse, which is a massive powerhouse of disabled excellence and conversations. So got to give you that credit too there for doing that. Our last speaker tonight is Alvaro Silverstein. Hi, Alvaro. You're muted.
I'm sorry for that. Hello, Mari. Hello, everyone. Excited to be here. I am one of the founders of Wheel the World. Wheel the World is it's a startup that we are building an online platform so people with disabilities can find and book accessible travel experiences, places to stay, things to do, and multi-day trips, with the value proposition that it's extremely detailed information of accessibility of what people can find and list at gowheeltheworld.com, and a customer experience that we allow them to understand exactly what fits their needs and have accessibility guarantee on their experiences. Super excited to be here. I am a Latin American man sitting on my manual wheelchair right now, and also with a Latin American accent to speak English because I'm originally from Chile.
Thank you all so much. Like, just listening to your introductions, one thing that I heard you all have in common is like you saw a need and you decided to become an entrepreneur in your own way to fill that need, which is what's so amazing about disabled entrepreneurship is it makes that accessible, and not only accessible, it's like we're creating that change that we need by being what we want to be and by being what we need to be. And we'll get a little bit more into that. But first, I want to dive into our first question, and we'll give everyone a chance to answer. Many entrepreneurs, they start their careers elsewhere. Like, I know for personal experience for me, I didn't start as an entrepreneur. I was a television director. I never thought I'd be an entrepreneur, actually. So I would love to know what brought you here to your entrepreneur journey. Melody, I'd love to start with you.
Sure. Well, before I started my own company, I started at a school for the deaf, and I worked at a nonprofit organization that focused in the deaf community. So my first couple of decades, I always lived in the deaf world, and I always wanted to start my own business. And, you know, what my first companies I worked with, I was a low-level employee. Even though I had great ideas, they weren't necessarily listening to them. So I decided it would be better to set up my own business. I was raised in a family of entrepreneurs, and my father always inspired me. So when I left the deaf world, I decided to use my ideas and test what would work, what didn't work. And I was really excited to do that as my first job as a restaurateur.
Thank you so much for sharing, Melody. And it's really interesting that you mentioned how they weren't really taking your ideas seriously, because statistically, I remember a study by the Center for Talent Innovation, which said 75% of the disabled employees surveyed had ideas that would drive like really great value for the company, but only 43% of them was actually listened to. And so that's something that's really relevant to everything. So thank you for sharing. Now I want to hand it over to our other content manager, Catherine Lewis, who is going to continue the conversation about the disabled entrepreneurship and everyone's journey. Hi, Katie.
Hi, thanks, guys. I apologize for having to step away for a moment. I had a very important doctor conversation on the phone, which I know many of you definitely understand how that goes. So I'm Katie, as Marie said. So I do believe we're on our second question. Is that correct, Marie?
First question on everyone, but Melody has to still answer.
Oh, yes, Melody, we would love to hear from you.
She's already answered. Everyone else has to still.
Okay, sorry about that. Sorry. Still catching up. I'm so sorry about that. Alex, would you give us a little bit of insights? Can you tell us a little bit of what kind of work you did before becoming an entrepreneur and kind of how you ended up on the path of entrepreneurship?
So I have a rather diverse career background. I still do have a full-time job. So the podcast and growing it into a brand is something I do after I do my 40 hours for the week. I spend, I think starting off the year, it's been ranging from about 20 to 40 hours a week on the podcast as well as my normal job. But I've moved around a ton. I'm actually going to be making my 23rd move of my life this year. And with that, I've had a lot of opportunity to try different careers. So I've worked retail, had about 10 years worth of retail experience. I kind of got into running my own business when Amazon was first starting out, and you could have your own sales through Amazon with drop shipping. Transitioned that into real estate, which is a great option, except for health insurance. So I decided to get a facility-based job that I'm in now. And I've had ulcerative colitis myself for 11 years now, and kind of got to the point where there was this itch I wasn't scratching, and felt that I had a lot of really good experiences that I need to talk about because other people are going through some of those darker times that I've been through in the past. And kind of came up with the idea of, well, let's start a podcast where people can come on and talk about the lowest points that they've been through to help other people in their communities that are actively dealing with that. And that's kind of where I'm at now, is turning that idea into a brand and either a corporation or a nonprofit this year. I'm still making that decision.
So I have a follow-up question for you before we move on to our next response. Do you eventually hope that your podcast and the entrepreneurship that you're doing there will become your, main source of employment, or do you kind of like the balance of having both? I know there are a lot of opinions about that. What is yours?
So the goal is long-term to turn it into the primary job and sole focus. And I think for those transitioning into an entrepreneurial kind of mindset, your side hustle is something you grow off of your main hustle until your side hustle can become your main hustle. And that's kind of where I'm at. I'm growing it up. I'm taking the free time that I have outside of work and kind of dumping it into it. So yeah, the long-term goal is to grow it up into a much larger brand, and eventually hopefully have some employees as well. So
that's awesome. You have to start somewhere. And
Yep.
Just like our CEO, Tiffany, just said, fun fact, Diversability started as a side hustle from our CEO, and now look how much we've grown. So that growth is absolutely possible. And I think that you're a testament to how much is possible, Alex. Adriana, can you tell us a little bit about your journey to entrepreneurship and what that looked like for you?
Yeah, so I've always been obsessed with technology. I've been a techie geek all my life. And after college, my first job was actually working at a place called Center for Applied Special Technology. And I was learning to, this was back in early 2000 when the internet was just kind of blowing up. So I was learning about accessibility, online accessibility, but because they were nonprofit and 9/11 happened, they lost a lot of their funding, and so I did not have a job. So then for a while I worked in nonprofits related to disability. I worked at our local rehab, and then I worked as a manager at a day hab. And similar to what Melody was saying, is where I had all these great ideas on how to build up that organization, and no one seemed to listen. And then after working there for 4 years, I was laid off. And for one day, I was miserable, but it was the greatest thing that could have happened because it really pushed me to follow my passion. And so a good friend of mine said, hey, you have all this experience in the disability space, both personal and professional. Why don't you become a consultant? And as I did that, I also had the time to pursue my passion for tech. So I got to go to a hackathon at MIT, and we won first place. And that's how it all started. And then we got a grant from the VA, the Department of Veterans Affairs. And that is how I am where I am today. So yeah, it's just a lot of happy accidents along the way.
It definitely can be a lot of twists and turns that lead us to entrepreneurship. And I'm really glad that you highlighted that, because a lot of us have very non-linear paths to being entrepreneurs, especially in the disability space. Can we hear from Alvaro? Did I pronounce your name correct? I'm sorry.
Perfect.
Okay.
Perfect, Catherine.
Can you
Yes,
tell us a
so-
little bit about your journey to entrepreneurship as well?
Yes, I also come from a family of entrepreneurs. My granddad, my dad, two of my brothers are entrepreneurs. I am disabled since 18 years old. I have a quadriplegia. I'm a manual wheelchair user, and I studied engineering. I did kind of a traditional career. I worked in a consultancy firm for a few years, and I started realizing that as a disabled person, I was realizing all the opportunities around of building things and fixing things towards me being more independent and being a more included person in society, and realizing that there was other people that could also be on similar situations. And I decided to move from Chile, where I grew up and lived almost all my life, to California, and I applied to a master's program in Berkeley. And my essay to apply there was, I want to become an entrepreneur to solve problems for people with disabilities. And different from Adriana, I didn't have any ideas related to become an entrepreneur. And the idea around Will the World came by accident, because once having a lot of experiences related to nature, living in California, I remember that my dream always was to visit a very famous place in Patagonia in the south of Chile called Torres del Paine National Park. I assumed that it was impossible for me to visit that place. But one day, with today my co-founder and good friend Camilo, we started figuring out on how to organize a friend's trip to Patagonia. There was like zero information about accessibility, on how to plan a trip of someone in a wheelchair to this destination that is visited by thousands of people every year. And nobody else in a wheelchair did the trip that we wanted to do. Long story short, we started to figure out on how to do it. I became the first person ever in a wheelchair to complete the W trek in Torres del Paine National Park in Patagonia. And our story went viral, and hundreds of people started reaching out after a few weeks of my trip. willing to repeat this trip, saying, oh, how cool that trip that Alvaro with his friends did. I also want to do it. And we started with Camilo organizing this trip to other people from cities that were like a few hours from this national park, to people from California, Australia, Brazil, France, etc. And then is when we realized that there was a big opportunity on how to make the travel industry more inclusive, not only to allow people to travel to Patagonia, but also to find and book accessible places to stay in New York or in Miami or in Los Angeles or in Chicago or in Barcelona or in Rio de Janeiro. So that's how we started and founded Wheel the World.
There are such rich stories from all of you about your journeys to entrepreneurship, and thank you all for sharing that. My next question for you guys, knowing what we know about entrepreneurship, and especially in the disability experience, entrepreneurship is often a much more accessible work style for those of us living with disabilities, but it's also incredibly demanding work. So I want to ask each of you how you balance both of those, juxtapositions of the reality of entrepreneurship in your own experience. Let's go back to Melody. Can you tell us a little bit about how you balance both the accessibility of entrepreneurship, but also the demanding nature of the work?
Yeah, that was really tough with me. My dad himself, so my family moved from Hong Kong to America, specifically for me because they wanted to send me to a deaf school. And so dad decided to set up his own business. And so he had his own business in Hong Kong, and we moved to the US, he decided to set up his own restaurant. And so I've watched my dad, going to different appointments, doing the renovations, doing the work, coming up with menus. And so I've seen my dad set up a restaurant business and the work that entailed. And so that has always been my dream, was to set up my own restaurant like my dad did. And so, now I was able to do that. I was able to open my own restaurant. And honestly, the hardest part of it was, for so long, me working and being around the deaf world, I never had to think about communication. There were no communication barriers working at a deaf school, being around other deaf folks. And when I decided to open up my own restaurant, I became immersed in the restaurateur world, like figuring out a lease, having to deal with the landlord, people who just moved to a different country, people who don't know anything about deaf folks, right? And especially the landlord that we were talking with, they were an immigrant themselves. They didn't know English very well. And not knowing how to deal with deaf folks, there were so many more barriers because of the communication. Getting permits from the city, because, like the restaurant itself wasn't meeting ADA requirements, and having to do the renovations basically meant that I had to go to the city by myself. And oftentimes people would look at me like, oh, no, you would have to book another appointment. You can't be the person. Or, if you want an interpreter, you have to book things ahead of time because we don't have an interpreter right away available to you right now. And like having to explain my needs in terms of accessibility, of having an interpreter and having the right to have an appointment when I needed it, it was just so much work, right? Like, and I've noticed that a lot of hearing folks who wanted to set up a restaurant business and open up their own restaurant did not have the same barriers as me. And they were able to go through the process of setting up a restaurant so much faster because I had so many more barriers. And having to do all that work, right? The paperwork, the explanation of my needs, and just all the different barriers that I had to overcome just was so much more. It was a lot more extra worry than just opening up and running a business. And so making sure I'm doing the work and educating the hearing community and hearing folks about how to work with deaf people, right? How you can approach us, how to work with us. And I wish that the city had hired a deaf consultant to work with them, that they already had a training so they knew how to work with deaf people, because that would have made my process so much easier if they had experience already in working with deaf folks. So yeah, it was a lot of work, but I'm so thankful that I was able to experience it and go through it. Especially because I don't want the next deaf person who wants to open up their restaurant to go through the same things I did.
I think that's a great, way to look at that, even though you had to experience so many barriers, maybe someone else who follows in your footsteps won't have to. That's awesome, Melody. And Tiffany says, way to be a trailblazer. I definitely agree with that. Alex, can you tell us a little bit about how you balance the demanding nature of entrepreneurship, especially adding into the mix that you balance a 9-to-5 as well?
Yeah, so it's a fun mix. So thankfully, my day job, I do facility management. So I just keep a facility running. Being a newer facility, thankfully, my day job isn't overly complicated and overly demanding most days. Occasionally I have days that get a little hectic, or if we're bringing contractors in to work on specific projects. But for the most part, I have a laid back work day, which allows me to actually take a good amount of time at work and think about and plan out things that I'm doing on the podcast, brainstorm, come up with future ideas, projects I want to work on, things I want to work towards. That way, when I get home at the end of the day, I actually can take, what for me, it's usually 4 p.m. Eastern time until about midnight Eastern time to dedicate to interviewing people, inviting them on for podcasts, creating. I do mostly motivational posters for my social media currently, as I work on video content as well, plan out video content, write up scripts, and a bunch of different actual content itself. So for me, I'm still kind of finding the right balance in timing. I know when I started the podcast, I was doing about 30 to 60 hours a week on top of a 40-hour job, which I did for a little while. I was pumping out like 3 episodes a week, which was a lot, and it was fun. I met some really cool people. And I think this year I'm going to be scaling it back to kind of widen out the net of essentially the podcast turning into a brand. And thankfully, having a laid back job and having a lot of time after work to dedicate to the podcast and growing it into something more than just a podcast, I'm finding the right balance for me. Being able to work at home is definitely a nice thing. Everything that I do is content creation at home. Podcast is recorded at home, videos are recorded at home, any actual editing, photo editing, poster editing, video editing, I can do at home. And being a gamer that's on my computer all the time, generally when I am at home, not being productive, it's kind of a space of comfort. Like, I'm used to being there. I have, my setup at home. I have a 3-monitor setup. So I have everything that I need right in front of me. I have all the tools that I need. So it's, at the end of the day, some days are long and there's a lot of grinding involved, especially for, editing or content creation when it comes to the posters. And there's just some days that just aren't fun, but have to get done. But most days it's something I enjoy doing. I love talking to people. I love meeting new people that are part of the community and learning what they're passionate about and why they're passionate about it. So it's not as much work as it is a level of socializing and learning, as opposed to, say, some people, they go to their 9-to-5 and they just grind it out. A lot of it's really fun. There's a little bit here and there that takes some time and some dedication and focus, but a lot of it's just kind of talking to people, which is really fun. So
thank you for that insight, Alex. I liked how you brought up that so much of the balance part of entrepreneurship is finding what works for you. And, it's a really individual thing, which we're learning as we talk to each of you. So thank you for bringing that up. Adriana, can you tell us a little bit about how you balance both the accessible nature and the very demanding nature of entrepreneurship in your life?
Yeah, well, for me, I feel like it actually gave me more freedom. When you have a 9-to-5 job and you're expected to be there and you only have, a certain amount of time off, etc. Whereas for me, I felt like it allowed me, just like Alex said, it allowed me to be productive when I'm more productive at a certain time of day, or allowed me to, go somewhere that if I had a 9-to-5 job, I would not be able to go and experience. So I feel like it actually gave me a little more freedom to do more things, even though it is demanding, but then you can make up for the time lost during the day if you're a night owl like I am. And I can do it later at night. So that's that's basically it. I feel like I had more freedom once I started doing this.
Thank you for Adriana for letting us know how you balance everything. And I definitely agree with you personally that while it's demanding, you're able to kind of make your own schedule. So there's an aspect of freedom to it. I like the way you put that. Alvaro, can you talk about how you balance everything as an entrepreneur?
First of all, it is tough, and I would say, given the experience of talking with other entrepreneurs, it is tough for everyone, right? Not only for the ones who have a disability or needs accessibility, and I would say that the first thing is that you have to do the introspection that if you are doing it, it's because you love it, right? And when you start a venture, a startup idea or whatever, the chances that the failing chances are always bigger than if you go for a 9-to-5 job. So the only thing that is left to you is to think, okay, I should enjoy it, right? Because it has some unique things. It is something that exposes you in a different way. So I realized through time that whatever it happens in terms of being successful or not on the goals that you want to achieve, to enjoy the process is key. To make sure that makes sense at the end of the day. And it's tough also because sometimes in my case, for me things takes a little longer, right? I'm quadriplegic. To type an email, it takes me a little longer than somebody else, or to get from point A to point B. And you start missing out of other things that are important to you. For example, exercising, or hanging out with friends whatsoever. I think also that's important to make sure that we need to take care of and spend the time to rest, to exercise, to whatever is important to you. And the best way to have time to don't miss out on those things is to build teams, right? Is to trust on other people, try to excite other people as you are on what you are building, share also the benefits of being an entrepreneur and empower them and find co-founders or find team members. I think also is something crucial in order to be successful. In my case, I hear a lot of podcasts and read a lot about entrepreneurship, startups, and all the time the advice that you hear is like, don't build businesses or startups with friends or with family members, because at the end of the day, you will is mixing different stuff with what is complicated. And I realized it that I did exactly the opposite. My co-founder is one of my best friends since I'm 10 years old. We work also, one of the first persons that we recruited for our team is also a very good friend. And I don't regret, because at the end of the day, those were the people that were also super excited about this idea that I start working on. So of course it's challenging, but at the end of the day, in my case, given that I needed more people to execute and achieve the goals that we had, with friends made things more fun and easier also to onboard them on the mission and the vision and what we were trying to build.
So many people are resoundingly agreeing with everything that you guys have said, especially what you just said, Alvaro, is to have fun and to always keep creating. Before I move on to our next question, I do want to remind our guests that if you have any questions for our presenters at all, go ahead and drop that question in the chat. We are keeping a record of all those questions. We do have a Q&A at the end of our event this evening that we will field those questions to our presenters today. So if you have any questions at all, go ahead and share those in the chat, and we will make sure that those are asked at the end of this evening's session. So my next question to you guys, I am going to skip around. I really wanted to take a moment to ask this question, that we talked a lot about how entrepreneurship can also be really freeing and incredibly passionate work and fun and all of those wonderful things. And I also want to highlight that as disabled entrepreneurs, there can also be a unique experience of stigma. And I'd love to hear your insights as to whether or not you have faced stigma as a disabled entrepreneur and what it's like to have faced that, what your philosophy on facing that stigma is, and kind of just some insights from each of you. I'm just going to go in order again, keep things simple. Melody, can you please tell us a little bit about your experiences and philosophies on stigma?
Absolutely. I've met many hearing people who have never met a deaf person before. And they would ask me questions like, can you drive? I would say, of course I can drive. You know, I used to have a truck and, you know, a large truck, matter of fact, and people were shocked when they would see me driving this truck, delivering pizzas and so on. So, you know, people would ask me, how can a deaf person run their own business? Other than being deaf, I'm a woman and I'm Asian. So I have a lot of intersectional identities, or people would judge me. They really couldn't believe that I was fully in charge. I would have to be loud and proud. You know, maybe they assumed that I was quiet, but I would be loud and proud as an entrepreneur. So I kept having to prove myself and defeat their judgment of me. I'd like to add one more thing. Some of you asked, you know, or people would ask me, you know, oh, would you like to join our meeting, or will you present to us? So I would ask them, well, sure. Will you provide me an interpreter? And they would say, oh, interpreters are too expensive. So they would want me to present to their group and then me to provide my own interpreter. So those are some ongoing challenges that I've had to face.
Do you have any advice for those who may be facing stigma themselves on how they may respond? What has been effective for you, Melody?
Well, you know, you got to show by through action. You know, if people didn't believe deaf people could have a job, I created jobs for deaf people. If you have a media platform, you have to share your story and raise awareness. Give other people an opportunity and hire them as well. When people say it's expensive to have an interpreter, really the other perspective is I have a lot of information to share, and my information can be shared through an interpreter and will benefit everyone. So you just have to reframe it.
I think that that's a really important way to put it, that reframing all of these things is a really good strategy for overcoming those stigmas. Thank you for that insight, Melody. Alex, how do you deal with stigma as a disabled entrepreneur, or in your 9 to 5? Either one would be really helpful, I think, for the guests tonight to hear about.
I'm going to be honest, as of recently, I haven't really had to deal with a ton of it. And I think that's part in the fact that I have an invisible disability with, ulcerative colitis being a non-visible one. And that's part of what I'm focusing kind of my goals on with the brand this year is I'm going to start kind of putting a lot of what is associated with colitis and disability in general in people's faces. And when you do it in the right media and in the right areas, you can do it in a public sense and kind of just throw it out there and make other people uncomfortable with it, unfortunately, to raise awareness to it. And that's something I've been working on because I'm very much interested in and study a lot on our rights in the United States, both as people with disabilities and as citizens in general. And one of the things that I want to focus on this year is what I'm going to be calling disability audits, auditing the public, auditing private companies around disability rights and what's covered under the ADA. And I still have to get creative on how to hit certain markets like the rental market and the real estate market, because there's a lot of discrimination in that area when it comes to finding rentals. But retail stores, public services, police officers, townships, cities in general, and seeing how they react to certain things, seeing how they react to mobility devices in certain areas, see how they react to certain questioning or information that's thrown at them, and kind of putting them on the spot. And thankfully, being in a state that is a one-party state when it comes to recording, I can do a lot of that remotely from the house without actually having to go to these physical companies and actually be able to record how they respond to certain questioning and see how it goes. And I think that maybe I don't deal with the stigma a lot myself, but I want to highlight it for people that don't even understand what it is or don't realize that maybe they put off stigma and judgment to other people that they're dealing with their own stuff. So I'm I guess in a way getting ahead of it, because I'm sure I'll deal with it at some point as I grow, and trying to raise awareness around it. If that makes sense.
I'm enjoying hearing all these different strategies for how to address stigma. We've got, those who are facing it head on and making an awareness campaign about it. Those who are, choosing to engage and educate. Adriana, can you tell us a little bit about how you address stigma as a disabled entrepreneur?
Yeah, so I'm in the tech field. Also, I have a very visible disability. And similar to Melody, I'm a woman in the tech field. And so going to networking events pre-COVID and such, it was very apparent that the male-dominated industry, plus someone with a very visible disability, I would really have to prove myself. And once I would start having a conversation with someone at those networking events, that would be when it was obvious, and they would make it obvious that, oh, wow, you do belong here. You do know what you're talking about. which I've always had to do, but when you're trying to build a company and build a product and have people believe in what you're working on and understand what you're working on, it's even more important to really articulate and having to prove that you know what you're doing. I know what I'm doing. I'm in the tech field. I'm a techie myself. And so I've always had to just kind of, use the jargon, use the lingo to show that yes, I do belong in those events, and I know what I'm doing. That's basically what I had to do.
So I'm a little bit curious because, I feel like so many of us, especially those that identify as, female in a traditionally male-dominated field, feel the need to prove ourselves. Now, did you go about that strategy to facing stigma because you felt it was a necessity, or because it felt like you would be able to actually make more of an impact that way? Which one led you to that choice, I guess?
I think it's both, because growing up, people would look at me and have these preconceived notions that maybe I was not capable of having a conversation. I was not intellectual. And so it's not just me as an entrepreneur. It's always in this way because of my very visible disability. So I think I've always had to do it, and I've always felt I had to do it. And I think those of us who have very physical disabilities, we can read people very well, and we can tell when there is someone who is definitely prejudging and has these preconceived ideas of disability, or has never actually met anyone with a disability before. And so that also becomes a teaching moment. And I know many of us with disabilities, we get tired of having to be teachers, having to educate non-disabled people about disability in general. It is very tiring. But then again, if someone has never experienced or come across anyone with a disability, then how else are they going to learn, right? How else can they become an ally to people with disabilities if you don't provide some of that guidance and some of that teaching? Another thing, when I was pitching one time and for a competition, and all of our judges were men. So me and my then co-founder, we were both female. We gave a great presentation. In the middle of the presentation, on the screen was an image of the map of the United States, and there were statistics. And we were stating statistics. And one of the judges interrupted, saying, "Oh, is this for, the United States?" Well, it was obvious that that judge was trying to derail the presentation, which we didn't let it happen. And then after the presentation, one of the judges happened to be our mentor in the program. So he abstained from judging, obviously, our pitch. And we asked him after, we said, hey, you know, we were all excited because we knew we did a really good job. And so we asked him, we said, so how did we do? And he said to us, he said, you were too confident. And we were thinking, huh? Like, what does that mean? And so we understood that if we were male, that would not have been an issue. But because we were female, it was something that they saw as a negative, that we were too confident. Also, my then business partner and co-founder, she had military experience. And she spoke about something relevant to the military because our product, our tech can be used by the military. And he proceeded to say that we should not talk about things that we don't know about. And so again, we were like, well, that is not something that we don't know about. This person has firsthand experience. And so again, not so much the disability aspect, but just us being identified as women, as female, was a hindrance in that situation. And others, we've noticed in other situations as well. You know, again, being in a male-dominated field in tech is really difficult in general.
Thank you, Adriana, for sharing that experience with you and sharing that, you know, was that experience with us, and for sharing that perspective. I can tell you that much of that resonated with me. And while I don't want to speak for anyone else, I get the feeling looking in the chat that it resonated with a lot of other people here tonight. So thank you so much for having the bravery to share that experience with all of us. Alvaro, can you tell us how you balance the stigma and how you choose to address the stigma that you may or may not experience as a disabled entrepreneur?
Yes, so I think that is, in my experience, I from an instant I became quadriplegic, right? I had an injury that before I didn't. So I realized the difference, right? Comparing with someone who was born with a disability. And I realized that you faced stigmas on many different scenarios and on many different experiences. When I went back to university after my accident, applying for jobs in the social life, etc., and also as an entrepreneur. And while I gain more independence, more confidence in myself, I realized what Adriana said pretty well, that every stigma instance or experience is a learning opportunity, right? And I believe that all of us here, the more than 40 people that are here in this chat, we are all related in some way with diversity, inclusion, disabilities, however you want to call it. We have the responsibility to educate, right? And we need to find those stigma instances and be brave and educate people, because I believe that the wind is on our side right now, comparing to 10, 20 years before. And people realize, right? People already, the majority of people understand that there are stigmas around. In my case, building my startup, there was a time that we decided with my co-founder to define our core values around what we do and what's the people that we want to work with. And one of the core values that we defined was positive activism. And that means we want to be activists on accessibility, on inclusion in a positive way, right? Not trying to point with the finger to people that are discriminating, but trying to educate and trying to do it in a positive way, so they can understand and learn and be more empathetic. So that's how we are trying to push things on a good way to be positive activists, and everyone in our team, we push them to live this value.
Thank you guys, each of you, for sharing all of that insight and talking about, you know, turning some negative things and some really difficult things that a lot of us as disabled people deal with, especially those of you who are entrepreneurs, and figuring out ways to turn them into some positive action and light, and helping to elevate the disabled experience, which, you know, together is our mission. I want to switch gears a little bit with you guys. Like we've talked about so much this evening, entrepreneurship is also incredibly rewarding, not only for those that you serve, but also for you as individuals and the organizations that you help run. So I would love for you guys to kind of brag it up a little bit and talk with us about one of the things that you are most proud of that you have accomplished as an entrepreneur, whether it's through your organization or as an individual. Melody, can you start us off and talk about some of the proudest moments or one of the proudest things that you've accomplished as an entrepreneur?
Sure. Well, I am very, very proud of the media attention we've gotten. We use that platform to share our stories, saying that deaf people can do anything. We are very talented. If you give them a chance, give them the proper training, then they will thrive. I feel like that message has really gotten out there and has convinced people and inspired people to consider hiring deaf people and giving them a chance. You give them the proper training, they can contribute to your company. You know, so the media opportunity to share our word has been tremendously successful. I'm very proud of that.
Congratulations, Melody. That is a huge accomplishment, especially as you continue to grow your brand and your business and also raise awareness for disabled entrepreneurship. Alex, can you talk to us about one of the most meaningful accomplishments or impacts that you've had in your entrepreneurship journey?
So I would say when it comes to the podcast, only being a little over 9 months into it, it started as just disability and chronic illness, because that's what specifically affects me. And a couple months into it, I expanded into people that deal with mental health issues and terminal illnesses. And last year, I was able to actually get people from all four of the communities to share their stories. And actually had somebody join from the terminal community, which I had been struggling with for a long time, to kind of get somebody open up about what they were going through. And one of the big things that I've been focusing on is trying to tie all those communities together, because I think we all understand each other on a certain level. And I think we can all learn from each other, regardless of what stage we're at with what we're dealing with. So for me, being able to get somebody from all of the different communities, and I mean, I interviewed, I think it was over 70 people last year, to share their stories was a really big win, because I didn't realize that many people would want to talk about what they were going through. And I was very surprised when I first posted. So for me, it was just how many people wanted to share. And how many people were willing to share about the most intimate things that they deal with on a day-to-day basis.
It sounds like you have really had some phenomenally meaningful experiences. Sometimes that can be an even bigger accomplishment than the traditional things that we're used to hearing as success or accomplishment. So congratulations on that, because you're actually touching people's lives in a meaningful way, and that's huge. Adriana, can you tell us a little bit about your proudest accomplishment or impact in your entrepreneurship journey?
I think mainly early on, when, especially right after we won the hackathon, we were getting messages from literally all over the globe saying, hey, I can use this for, professionals in the AT industry saying, oh my God, this will be a game changer. I have, clients that could use this. And so to hear people saying, oh my God, I want this, and I could use this, and this would change my life, really meant a lot. And then also, we ended up on Now This. I don't know if you guys know the viral videos on Facebook and stuff, but our story was on Now This, and then we ended up in the New York Times and Boston Globe and things like that. So I'm really proud of that, and raising awareness in major media streams about people with disabilities, and mainly people with disabilities who can't use basic things like a cell phone, like a smartphone, and things like that that people don't often think about. So yeah.
I'm muted, sorry. That is a huge accomplishment, Adriana. Congratulations on that. Alvaro, can you tell us about your most beloved accomplishment in your entrepreneurship journey?
I would say there are two. The first one is like all the people that we have impacted, traveling places that they never thought possible for them, doing things that they also didn't think that they could. We have impacted already around 1,200 people, and I'm super proud about it. And every time that someone uses our services to travel, it's the moment that we celebrate. And the second thing that I'm super proud of is on building a team that is super committed with our mission. Today we are a 20 people team, full-time, and 50% of them, they are disabled, or they have a family member or a friend who has a disability. So I can relate with that, right? That they feel that our mission is close to their hearts and close to what they want to do. But the other 50%, they never thought about working for a startup that has a mission related to accessibility and to allowing people with disabilities to do something that otherwise they struggle with, right? And that's something that I'm very proud, because it is people that they could be working for Google or Amazon or whatever, and they are like having a way lower salary working for Will the World and being super passionate about it and feel that Will the World also is part of themselves. That's something that I'm very proud of, and that's something that I really like too, like building teams and allowing people to find motivations to work for something that makes sense for them. It's something that I really love doing.
I can tell you that Diversability definitely understands the power of growing a team. So congratulations on growing your team. That is a huge accomplishment in and of itself. Thank you all for sharing all of your insights. I do want, even though we did have a couple questions programmed in addition to the ones that we've talked about this evening, I do want to give us enough time to field some of the questions that our participants tonight have given us to ask you all. The way we typically do this is I field the question and give it as an open response for any of you panelists to answer. If there is enough of a lull and no one has decided they want to answer, I usually just start pinpointing people, put you on the spot. But usually plenty of people, our presenters, want to jump in and start answering right away. So the first question that we got this evening is from Lacey. If the presenters are comfortable, they ask, are you able to meet your financial obligations? How are you able to meet those obligations? Do you consider yourselves financially free? Or how are the expenses compared to your income? Basically, how are you guys able to meet your financial needs as an entrepreneur, especially a disabled entrepreneur? I'm going straight for the hard ones.
I can take that one. And I wanna complement that one with a question that Tiffany asked that I read, that is what like to recommend to bootstrap or to raise funds. So I will complement this. In my case, I've been in these 3 years working at Will the World. I've been able to be independent financially and to pay my bills independently and not depend on other people. It has been hard. I have had to make sacrifices, and I think most probably that I would be in a financially better situation if I haven't become an entrepreneur, to be super honest. And I think that that's kind of the average situation, right? Like if you take every entrepreneur in the world, the opportunity cost financially, I think is higher comparing to having a 9-to-5 job. But I've been super pushy to first to bootstrap. I would say, to complement it to the question of Tiffany, try to bootstrap as much as you can. That would be my first recommendation. I did everything when we started. I don't know. I did speeches on companies to pay my bills. I did partnerships with brands in order to get money to continue doing what we were doing. I was part of a TV show in Chile, which was super awkward and uncomfortable because I wanted to have some money to in moments that we didn't have any revenues. And we were like applying to every single grant that we find out there, so we could fund ourselves. And there was at some point that we realized that we had a pretty clear value proposition in order to get some like private funding to our startup. And the most difficult thing to change investors' minds is everyone would tell you, if you are dedicating something related to disabilities, is like, okay, so what's the addressable market, right? And they start automatically thinking that the addressable market is not big enough, and which I disagree, because there's many people with disabilities in the world, and if you consider that we have family members and friends that they're all already seeking accessibility and inclusive products and services, that number can be multiplied by 2 or by 3, right? And going back to the question, like, try to bootstrap as much as you can, and once you are confident on what's your value proposition and how you can scale that, go and ask for private money and be resilient, because it's not easy and it takes super long.
Yeah, I like to echo what Alvaro said. I mean, exactly that. Bootstrap as much as you can. And I like what Tiffany wrote, or was it? Yeah, Tiffany wrote about people glamorizing raising funds. If you could do as much non-dilutive funding as possible, and similar to Alvaro, like, we've applied to as many grants as possible, and I do side jobs to raise some money to keep going, especially during COVID, and things like that. So yeah, I mean, you have to hustle the whole time to make that money to keep things going and keep things running. It's not glamorous at all until you're really, making some revenue. But yeah.
Before we move on to our next question from our participants, do any of our other panelists have any insights for that question? Melody
here. So I've founded 3 businesses, one in the service industry and focusing on providing business consulting to deaf entrepreneurs. And there's a small charge, a low fee for that. And which is very different than now, me working with Mix 2510. It's based in LA, it's a lot more expensive, and we are bootstrapping. We're using what we have to start up our own business. And how do we continue to invest in creating this business line? And we are only 2 months into this current business. And how do we keep it up? How do we keep going? How do we keep up new ideas and finding a way to bring in money for this particular business? And I've also been in the restaurant business, right? And that has like the highest cost of all, because you need a storefront, right, for a restaurant compared to like selling clothing or other businesses or other services. And so like you have to follow business codes, for example. And so there's a whole lot more costs and a lot more labor. It's a lot more labor intensive as well in terms of in the business restaurant industry. And so talking to my husband, who was our co-founder, trying to figure out how can we save as much as possible in terms of, and always making sure we have a little bit saved for a rainy day. And so we were getting denied all the time from banks, just because we've never set up a restaurant before, we've never opened up a restaurant before. And so getting a loan was really difficult from banks. And that was one of the really huge challenging part for us. And it took us a long time to finally get a loan from a bank. We had to do so much proving of ourselves in terms of our financial stability and what we were able to do. And so, but I agree though, bootstrapping as much as possible is the way to go.
We have another question from Sean. Can the speakers describe a time or the time during creating their business when the world kind of finally had the aha moment, when your business, your story, your offerings became important and relevant to them and they started garnering support, financial or otherwise? Can you share about that experience?
I'll hop in on this one. All right. So been doing the podcast for 9 or so months now. And I first started with talking about myself. One of my fundamental values was I'm not going to have everybody on the podcast and ask them things that I wouldn't be willing to share about myself. And part of that was going through everything, how it affected my day-to-day life, work, job, social relationships, financial aspects of it, mental health, everything. And the more that I've gotten into it, the more I've realized that as an entrepreneur in the disabled and advocacy space, we have every single tool that we need if you're willing to wake up and notice it. And I say that because the more I do the podcast, the more I realize who I am. And the more I realize who I was hiding, who I wasn't communicating, and who I wasn't, I guess, genuinely being. I was being what I thought I wanted to be, what I thought everything around me wanted to be. And the more I talk about my experiences, the more I talk about with other people, their experiences, the more I realize like we have an incredible amount of knowledge and we are incredibly unique. Now, when you're starting a business, uniqueness is important. We all have exactly what we need to be entrepreneurs in this space. And not everybody wants to. I get that. I have been in a shell for so long, and I've gotten to the point where I'm pissed off with myself for not talking about what I'm going through because other people are going through it, where that's my viewpoint on it. I'm not worried about, hey, what are people going to think about it? I'm worried about, hey, I've had some incredibly low lows that were horrible, that I would never want to deal with again, that hundreds of people are dealing with today. And they don't know how to navigate through that. So for me, it was, I have this amazing amount of information that can help other people suffer less. And through the podcast, I kind of came up with a saying that I think applies very directly to me. And it is, pain puts things into perspective, and that perspective has given me a purpose. And the more I'm realizing that, the more I'm kind of turning it into a brand and trying to get other people to realize, hey, as bad as it may have been in the past, help somebody who's going through it now.
Thank you for that insight, Alex. Yeah, it's hard to balance that, isn't it? Does anyone else have any perspective on that question before we move on to the next question? Okay, so let's move on to the next question. We have, oh, okay, here we go. Sorry, long paragraph. I'm trying to read it and get to the question part. Pardon me. So we have an anonymous question. They're curious if any of you have any conditions where you need to pace yourself or can't always work and work those long hours that sometimes come with entrepreneurship. If you do experience any of those kinds of barriers or obstacles, how do you pace yourself when you need to, and also still move your business forward or your organization forward? How do you figure all of that out at the same time and kind of balance those needs?
I mean, I can hop in. So for myself, I have ulcerative colitis and I have my highs and lows. I usually describe it as a wave that kind of has a 6-week cycle due to my infusions that I get every 6 weeks. I generally have a couple of days of low before my infusion, a couple of days of low after my infusion. And that's just because I fall on the severe side of colitis and I don't necessarily want to introduce any more medications that aren't necessarily needed. Thankfully, being a content creator and having my online based brand, I understand that I have my lows and I have my highs. And when it comes to scheduling people, I can have times where it's like, okay, you know what? I feel great. I got a ton of energy. I have no problem grinding out like 3 separate interviews in a day. back to back to back, which I've done. And it's a lot of energy, and realize how much socializing counts even when you're doing Zoom meetings. And when I have the energy to do that, it's important to recognize it and say, hey, look, I got the energy, I'm going to use it. And if maybe I don't have anything scheduled as far as interviews and having people come on and talk, okay, let's catch up on editing. Let's catch up on photo editing, video editing, audio editing. And I understand that when I have my down days, I generally schedule and block off around it. My infusion is usually on Fridays, so I automatically take Fridays off from actual podcast interviews, just because that day when I do get my infusion always varies, and I like to be consistent. I usually take Wednesdays and Fridays off from actual scheduling if I need to catch up on anything, or if I do actually want to have a life outside of my brand every once in a while. And I try to use a lot of tools that help me. And it's really important to kind of find a schedule that works for you and balance everything that you do around it. And for me, I have the energy right now to work a 40-hour week and then come and put another 20 to 40 hour into a podcast. That's what I can do right now. And I'm trying to take advantage of it, and I'm trying to utilize that, because I understand that's not always going to be the day-to-day reality, but I'm trying to set up systems that allow me to schedule out as much as I can, like Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter. I just started using that. The motivational posters that I post twice a day. I am in New Jersey right now for a wedding. I actually scheduled that out through the next 3 months, so I don't have to touch them for 3 more months. They're scheduled out, and I can add other content as I want. I'm working on videos as well. I'm working on a giant library of just pre-recorded, edited, and scheduled, because that's what works for me. And that's how I can do things. I don't like to do just one thing here, one thing there, just throwing it out, which I do from time to time, maybe on TikTok. But it's taking those days where I have the energy, where I have the time, I have the day off, and I'm like, all right, we're making a bunch of videos, we're editing them, and we're saving them. So that way we can just post a whole bunch of stuff consistently and space it out. And that's the way I kind of approach it.
I hope that answered the question about how to kind of balance chronic conditions.
I can also complement with that if you
Yeah.
want. I have a great co-founder, and he understands that I need to pace out sometimes. And he understands that we are a complement, and sometimes I bring things that he can't. And relying on him has been key.
So kind of having that other support system, those other people within your organization. Am I hearing that right, Alvaro? Do any of our other, yeah, sorry, I wasn't sure if you heard me or if there was a delay. Do we have any other insights from our other presenters before we go to the next question? I think we have a time for maybe one more, if it's really short. Okay, so next question, very last question, very briefly before we close out today's event. What advice do you have, if any, to other people in this community who have aspirations of becoming an entrepreneur themselves?
I would say 2 big things: be passionate about what you're doing and be genuine to who you are. If you can't do those 2 things, rethink what you're doing.
Yeah, I agree with what Alex said. If you're not passionate about what you're doing, then there's no way that it's going to go anywhere. But also, as any entrepreneur, and what any entrepreneur is told is that you need to also make sure that there is a need for what it is that you want to pursue as well, because just because you want to start a business does not mean that there are people out there who will pay for whatever it is that you're going to be producing. And so, you know, you might be doing all this work and not get anywhere because there isn't that market out there. So, you know, and that's not related to disability at all. It's just entrepreneurship 101 is, you know, what problem are you solving? Is there a need for what you want to focus on? And again, it's the passion that drives success. So yeah, without passion, you're not going anywhere. and resilience. I mean, entrepreneurship is a roller coaster, literally a roller coaster. There are very high highs and very low lows, and you just got to get past those lows and remember the highs to keep you going.
Thank you guys so much. I think that was a great way to end today's event on that insight. Alvaro, did you have one last thing to add? You raised your hand.
I wanted to say, enjoy the ride. Don't be hard on yourself if you fail. Failing is overrated, to put it that way. And if you persevere, most probably that you will not fail.
Awesome way to end that. Thank you so much for that insight. We want to thank all of our panelists, our guests for being here today, our interpreters. Thank you guys so much for being here and helping make this event that much more accessible to all of our attendees. The Diversability team, as always, you know, we work really hard to help elevate disabled pride together. We could not do it without the team, but we also could not do it without you, our community of amazing disabled lives. And we want to thank you for being here, supporting us, supporting our work, and supporting the disabled community. If you want to continue the conversation, we will drop the rest of the questions that we were not able to get to today in our community, both in the Facebook group and the Diversability Leadership Collective, our membership-based community. We will be answering those questions, starting new conversations, and we encourage you to join those communities. The links, Tiffany just put those in the chat for your convenience. And until then, we cannot wait to see you for our next event and continue these important conversations with all of you. Bye, everybody.